It was a bright morning in downtown Atlanta, the kind that made the city feel alive. People rushed through the streets, taxis honked, and coffee shops overflowed with customers starting their day. But for Jordan Carter, today was just another work day. Jordan was a delivery driver. He'd been in the business for years, delivering supplies to some of the most high-end restaurants in the city. He wasn't flashy, didn't demand attention, but there was a quiet confidence in the way he carried himself, a man who knew his worth even when others didn't. On this particular morning, his delivery route took him to La Vela, a luxury fine dining restaurant known for its exclusivity. It was the kind of place where celebrities dined, executives closed deals, and reservations were booked months in advance. The staff carried themselves with an air of superiority, and outsiders, especially those they deemed less important, were rarely given a second glance. Jordan pulled his truck into the narrow alleyway behind the restaurant, where deliveries were usually made. The back entrance was sleek, a large silver door marked "Staff Only," standing tall like a gatekeeper to another world. He put on his gloves, grabbed his clipboard, and carefully stacked the boxes of organic produce and premium seafood onto his dolly. Fresh ingredients that would soon become gourmet dishes, selling for hundreds of dollars per plate. As he wheeled the load toward the door, he heard voices from inside. Laughter. Not the warm, friendly kind, but the sharp-edged laughter that made a man's shoulders stiffen. Jordan sighed, but didn't let it shake him. He had heard it before. He had seen their type before. Still, he knocked twice on the steel door and waited. The door swung open, and a young man in a white chef's coat stood in the doorway. His name tag read Logan, and the moment he laid eyes on Jordan, his expression shifted from neutral to annoyed. "Deliveries are supposed to be here earlier," Logan snapped, barely glancing at the boxes. His tone dripped with irritation, like Jordan had just interrupted something important. Jordan held up the invoice, calm, unshaken. "I'm right on the schedule. Fresh seafood from Atlantic Imports and the organic greens your chef requested." Behind Logan, two other kitchen staff members peeked over his shoulder. One of them chuckled under his breath. The other rolled her eyes. "Guess they just let anyone handle deliveries nowadays," one of them muttered. The comment wasn't directed at Jordan, but it was meant for him to hear. Logan sighed, waving him off. "Just bring it in, and don't block the kitchen entrance." Jordan said nothing. He simply pushed the dolly inside, but he could feel their eyes on him. Inside, the restaurant's kitchen was a masterpiece of stainless steel and pristine white marble. The smell of freshly baked bread and simmering sauces filled the air. This was where magic happened, where dishes that cost more than Jordan's entire grocery bill were prepared with precision. But beneath the luxury, something else was brewing. Jordan had barely made it past the doorway before he heard another voice, low and mocking. "Man, I bet this guy couldn't even afford to eat here," someone whispered, loud enough for the others to hear. Laughter. Jordan didn't react. He had heard it all before. Another chef, a tall man with a smug smirk, leaned toward Logan. "Hope he doesn't drop anything. Don't want his kind making a mess." More laughter, the kind that stings. Jordan continued his work. He unloaded the boxes carefully, efficiently, professionally, as he had done for years. But the whispers didn't stop. You'd think delivery guys would at least dress better. Probably his side job. No way this guy has a real career. Jordan glanced down at his clean, pressed uniform. Functional, professional. But to them, it wasn't good enough. He could feel the weight of their stares, their judgment. But he still didn't flinch, because he knew something they didn't. And soon enough, their laughter would disappear. Jordan kept moving. He had a job to do, and no amount of mocking or judgment was going to stop him. He maneuvered the dolly through the kitchen, stacking the boxes neatly near the walk-in refrigerator. His hands were steady, his expression unreadable. But the whispers, they weren't stopping. At the far end of the kitchen, a group of waitstaff stood near the silver countertops folding napkins. Every few seconds, one of them would glance in his direction, whisper something and chuckle. "Man, did you see his truck?" one of them said. "I don't even know how that thing made it here." More laughter. Jordan ignored them. But what he didn't ignore was the man standing near the head of the kitchen. A sharp-featured man with salt and pepper hair, a pressed white chef's coat, and a presence that demanded attention. Marcus Bennett, the executive chef, the man in charge. Marcus wasn't laughing. He wasn't whispering. But the way he looked at Jordan, it said everything. Jordan could feel it, the scrutiny, the superiority, the silent judgment. Marcus lifted a crate of seafood, examining it like it was beneath him, like it wasn't worthy of his kitchen. "Is this really the best they could send?" Marcus muttered, his voice just loud enough for Jordan to hear. Jordan exhaled slowly, keeping his tone level. "If there's an issue with the quality, I can call the supplier." Marcus waved a dismissive hand. No, just drop it off and leave. We have actual work to do." Jordan didn't respond. He kept unloading the boxes, his movements controlled. But in the background, the jokes kept coming. "You think he's ever stepped foot in a place like this? Bet he gets his dinner from a drive-through window." The words hung in the air, but Jordan didn't flinch, because he knew something they didn't. As he finished unloading, one of the kitchen staff, a young, cocky sous chef named Evan, called out with a smirk, "Hey, delivery guy! You missed a box." Jordan turned, confused. He was sure he hadn't. Evan pointed toward a crate near the entrance. Jordan walked over, bent down, and lifted it. Empty. The moment he realized it, another wave of laughter rippled through the kitchen. "Just messing with you, man," Evan chuckled. "Relax a little." Jordan didn't react. He simply set the empty crate back down and finished his work without a word. But inside his patience was running thin. He wasn't angry. No, Jordan had learned a long time ago that anger was a waste of energy. But what he did feel? Disappointment. Not in himself. In them. They had no idea who they were mocking, but soon enough they would. Because the real surprise, it was still coming. Jordan walked back to his truck, the weight of the morning pressing against him. He had dealt with attitudes like this before, people who thought they were better than him, people who assumed they knew his worth just by looking at him. But what they didn't know was that their laughter wouldn't last much longer. He loaded up his dolly with the last set of deliveries, wiped the sweat from his brow, and headed back inside. And that's when he heard it. A voice. Low, disrespectful. "Man, I don't get why people like him even try to work around places like this," someone muttered. Jordan stopped. His hand tightened on the dolly handle for just a second. He turned his head slightly, just enough to see them out of the corner of his eye. A waiter, a bartender, and one of the junior chefs stood near the prep station, shaking their heads. "Like, come on," the waiter continued, oblivious to the fact that Jordan could hear every word. "A guy like that, in a place like this, it's laughable." The bartender chuckled. "Probably makes just enough to scrape by. Bet he couldn't even afford to eat here once." The laughter came again. Jordan exhaled slowly. He wasn't mad, he wasn't surprised, but what he was ready. This delivery, it was almost over. And when it was, they would see him differently. For now, though, he kept moving, unloading the last of the boxes, checking off the items from his clipboard. He was calm, professional, unshaken. Even when he passed Chef Marcus, who barely spared him a glance, even when Logan, the sous chef, walked by and muttered, "Don't scuff the floors with that dolly," even when the waitstaff watched him like he was something beneath them. But then, just as Jordan finished unloading and turned toward the exit, a voice cut through the air. "Yeah, go back to wherever you came from." The words weren't whispered this time. They were loud enough for the room to hear. The kitchen fell silent. For the first time that morning, Jordan stopped completely. His hand rested on the door handle, his head tilted slightly. And then he turned, slowly, deliberately. His gaze landed on the waiter who had spoken. The young man's smirk faded as Jordan looked at him. Jordan wasn't angry. His face didn't twist in frustration. His shoulders didn't tense. Instead, he smiled, a small, knowing smile. And then, in a calm, steady voice, he said, "I came here to deliver something you clearly need more of, respect." The silence in the kitchen was thick. No one laughed now, no one smirked, no one said a word. Jordan turned back toward the door, pushed it open, and stepped outside. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't have guessed, was that he wasn't leaving for good, because in just a few short hours, Jordan would be back. And this time, he wouldn't be coming through the back door. Jordan leaned against his truck, taking a slow, measured breath. The delivery was done, but the real work, it was just beginning. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through a few emails before opening his calendar. His next meeting was in a couple of hours, right here at La Vella, not as a delivery man, not as someone to be mocked or dismissed, but as the new owner. Just a few weeks ago, Jordan had signed the final papers that made La Vella his latest acquisition. It was a bold move, buying one of the most prestigious restaurants in the city. But it wasn't about status or power for him. It was about legacy. It was about proving that respect isn't something you give based on appearance, but on character. And today was the first step in changing the culture inside that kitchen. Jordan glanced back at the building, the gold-lettered sign reflecting in the morning sun. Just hours ago, he had walked through that back door as someone they thought they could look down on. And soon, he'd walk through the front on his own terms. 2 p.m. staff meeting. Inside La Vella's elegant dining room, the entire staff gathered, some leaning against tables, others standing with arms crossed. Chef Marcus was near the front, clearly annoyed by the mandatory meeting. Logan, the sous chef, whispered something to Evan, the same junior chef who had mocked Jordan earlier. A few waitstaff looked confused, unsure why they had all been called in the middle of the day. At the entrance, Greg, the restaurant's manager, stood nervously, checking his watch. "Who even is this new owner?" Logan muttered under his breath. "If it's some corporate guy, we're probably screwed." Marcus scoffed. "Whoever it is, I hope they actually know fine dining, not some amateur trying to run a business they don't understand." A few of the staff chuckled. And then the doors opened, and in walked Jordan, still in his delivery uniform, still the same man they had laughed at that morning. The room fell dead silent. Logan's smirk disappeared. Evan's arms dropped to his sides. The waitstaff exchanged nervous glances. Marcus, standing at the front of the room, took a slow step forward, his eyebrows pulling together. "What is this?" he asked, his voice carefully measured. "This meeting is for staff only." Jordan smiled. "I know," he said, calm and steady. Marcus narrowed his eyes. "Then what are you doing here?" Jordan took his time, walking to the center of the room. He let the silence stretch, let their confusion sink in. Then he spoke. "I'm here because I own this restaurant. The weight of his words hit the room like a shock wave. Marcus's face froze. Logan's mouth fell open slightly. Evan looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. The waitstaff stiffened, their earlier confidence replaced by a quiet, growing embarrassment. Greg, the manager, cleared his throat, visibly sweating now. "You're the new owner?" Jordan nodded. "Signed the papers 3 weeks ago." Silence. Then Marcus forced a chuckle, though it didn't reach his eyes. Wait, you mean to tell me that this morning, when you were delivering boxes, you was doing my job?" Jordan interrupted smoothly. "Just not the job you thought I had." Marcus had no words. Jordan let his gaze sweep across the room, meeting the eyes of every single person who had disrespected him. Then he spoke again. "Before we go any further, I want you all to think about something. How did you treat me today?" Silence. No one moved. No one dared to speak. Jordan nodded, almost as if he expected their silence. "That tells me everything I need to know about how this place operates when you think no one important is watching." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "Look, we didn't know who you were." "Exactly," Jordan cut in. "You didn't know, and yet you judged me anyway." More silence. The weight of shame and realization settled over the staff like a heavy fog. Jordan continued, his voice calm but firm. "And that? That ends today." He took another step forward, his presence commanding the room. "This restaurant has built a reputation on exclusivity, on status. But what good is status if the people behind the scenes don't even respect each other?" Marcus said nothing. Logan looked at the floor. Evan swallowed hard, his earlier cocky smirk completely gone. Jordan crossed his arms. "I worked my way up from nothing. I know what it's like to be at the bottom. I know what it's like to be underestimated. And let me tell you, you never really know who you're talking to." He let those words sink in. A few staff members shifted in their seats, clearly uncomfortable. Jordan took a deep breath. "This place is about to change. I don't care about your titles, your background, or how long you've been here. Every person who walks through those doors deserves respect, whether they're a customer, a chef, or the guy delivering your ingredients." He glanced at Marcus. "That includes leadership." Marcus stiffened, but he didn't argue. Jordan looked over the entire team. "If that's a problem for anyone, you're welcome to leave right now." No one moved. No one dared. Jordan nodded. "Good. Because I didn't come here to fire people. I came here to build something better. But that starts with you." The silence in the room was different now. It wasn't just shock. It was understanding. And for the first time that day, Jordan saw change in their eyes. The room was still. No more whispers, no more smirks, just silence. Jordan let the moment linger. He could see it in their eyes, the realization finally sinking in. The same man they had mocked, dismissed, and judged that morning was now their boss. He didn't have to raise his voice. Respect didn't come from volume, it came from presence. And Jordan's presence filled the room. Chef Marcus, the once arrogant and unshaken leader, shifted uncomfortably. His usual air of authority had been stripped away. Logan, the young sous chef who had sneered at Jordan earlier, now looked like he wanted to disappear. Evan, who had played that childish prank with the empty crate, kept his gaze locked on the floor. And the waiter, the one who had said, "Go back to wherever you came from," looked pale. Jordan exhaled, slow and steady. Then he spoke. "I don't need an apology." That made a few heads lift in surprise. "But I do need something else," he continued. "A promise. That from this day forward, this restaurant will not be built on arrogance, ego, or judgment. It will be built on respect. The staff remained quiet. Jordan walked forward, stopping near Marcus. "You're the head chef here," he said. "Tell me something. What's more important in a kitchen, the ingredients or the people preparing them?" Marcus hesitated, his throat bobbing as he swallowed. "The people," he finally admitted. Jordan nodded. "Exactly, and the same goes for this restaurant. It doesn't matter how exclusive this place is. If the people inside it don't treat each other with respect, it won't last." More silence. Greg, the restaurant manager, rubbed the back of his neck, clearly uncomfortable with the shift in power dynamics. He started, then sighed. "I think we all get your point, Mr. Carter." Jordan raised an eyebrow. Greg cleared his throat. "Jordan!" Jordan nodded, satisfied. Then he turned to the rest of the staff. "Here's the deal. You don't have to like me. You don't even have to like each other. But if you work here, you will show respect to your co-workers, to your guests, and to the people who keep this place running behind the scenes." He let his words settle before adding, "If you can't do that, this isn't the place for you." Logan lowered his head. Evan shifted on his feet. The waiter who had insulted him looked sick to his stomach. Jordan gave them a moment. Then he clapped his hands together. "All right, meeting's over. Get back to work." The staff hesitated before moving, still processing everything. Marcus was the last to turn away, but before he did, he met Jordan's gaze. There was something different now. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't arrogance. It was understanding. And maybe, just maybe, a little respect. Jordan let out a slow breath as he watched them return to their stations. He knew change wouldn't happen overnight. He knew some of them would resist, hesitate, struggle with their own biases. But today was a start, and for the first time since stepping into that restaurant, Jordan Carter smiled. Because Lavella? It was no longer just a restaurant. It was about to become something much more.